Okay, we're with William Federer, historian and a published author of many books, 20 books, I believe. And he's going to talk to us today. He's also a Christian, by the way. He's going to talk to us about some of his books and just give you a wealth of knowledge today. Go ahead, take it away.
Well, Carlton, it's great to be with you here at the Freedom Fest. And one of the books that I wanted to mention is called What Every American Needs to Know About the Koran. It is a history of Islam and the United States. And so we see Islam in the news a lot, and we see terrorist attacks happening, and politicians are quick to assure us that those terrorists do not represent true Islam. Yet in many cases, the terrorists are yelling Allahu Akbar, and they claim they do represent true Islam. Who can tell us what true Islam is? One person, Muhammad. Muhammad was the best Muslim that ever lived. So his life is the Sunnah, which means the way or the example. And we look at his life and went through 3 stages. He was a religious leader for 12 years in the pagan city of Mecca, and he only makes 70 converts in 12 years. And then he gets confrontational, and they chase Muhammad out of town. In the year 622 AD, he has nowhere to go. He is a Muslim refugee. And so he flees 210 miles to the north to a Jewish city called Medina. And they're nice and tolerant, and they let Muhammad in as a Muslim immigrant. And he goes into the minority neighborhoods, and he begins to organize a following amongst the people who have grievances against the Jewish government. We're familiar with the term of organizing in the community. And when his following is big enough, he goes to the Jews and pressures them to accommodate him and his followers politically. And they do, and now Muhammad's a political leader. When his followers get confrontational and they're chased out of Mecca, they are Muslim refugees. They go to Medina as Muslim immigrants, and Muhammad allows them to rob the caravans headed to Mecca in retaliation for the Meccans chasing them out of town. So where Jesus said, if they take your coat, give them your shirt, his attitude was, if they take your house, you retaliate, take their caravan. So he has 300 warriors, they rob caravans. He gets a whole chapter of the Koran, it's chapter 8, Surah 8, on how to distribute booty from robbing caravans. Muhammad gets a fifth of the booty. And so the Meccans send 1,000 soldiers to escort and protect their caravan. Muhammad, with 300 warriors, defeats them at the Battle of Badra in 624 AD. This amazing victory, having been outnumbered 3-1, convinces Muhammad to be a military leader. And he fights in 66 battles and raids in the next 8 years before he dies. He even used the catapult when he attacked the city of Al-Taif. And when they told him the catapult was killing women and children, his response was, they are among them, so they got to be killed too. So suicide bombers and ISIS killers say it's okay to kill innocent people to advance Islam because Muhammad did. And so within 5 years of him coming as an immigrant into the Jewish city of Medina, there's not a Jew left in the city of Medina. They were chased out, killed, or enslaved. And we begin to see this pattern repeat itself over the next 1,400 years. It's all in the book, What Every American Needs to Know About the Quran, a history of Islam and the United States.
That's great. And you've written some other books here. What other books have you written, William, that might be of interest to some of my viewers?
Well, here's one. It's called Miracles in American History.
Okay.
So these are stories from our country's past where there's a crisis, they pray, and things turn around. From the Revolution, the War of 1812, the Civil War, the Barbary Pirate War. And so even George Patton, the general during World War II, was coming to the rescue of the 101st Airborne. But he was pinned down because the cloudy weather would not allow the planes to fly. So he has his chaplain, James O'Neill, compose a prayer. They print it on 250,000 index cards. They pray it, and the next day the sky clears, his planes fly, his army can march, and he rescues the 101st Airborne and stops the Battle of the Bulge there. So the book is filled with those kind of stories, and it's called Miracles in American History, 32 amazing stories of answered prayer.
Excellent. Grab another couple here, because you've written so many here. Yes, that one right there.
So here one is called Who is the King in America? And it's an overview of all of world history and how the most common form of government is a king. So writing was invented around 3,000 or 4,000 BC.
By the Chinese or Sumerian?
Sumerian cuneiform on clay tablets in the Mesopotamian Valley. Today that's Iraq.
Iraq, wow.
And so that was 3,300 BC. Chinese characters were invented around 2,600 BC. Egyptian hieroglyphics were invented around 3,000 BC. You round it out, it's 3,000 or 4,000 BC, and we are around 2080, so that's around 5,000 or 6,000 years of recorded human history. Human beings writing down human records.
Yes.
And so 6,000 years is not that long. It's only 60 people living 100 years each, back to back. I ask people, have you ever met someone who's lived 100 years? Yeah, maybe a grandmother. We're talking 60 grandmothers, and you're all the way back to the beginning of recorded human history. And so if we look at these records, what do they show? They show that power keeps wanting to concentrate into the hands of one person. And the name changes, but the function remains the same, whether it's a pharaoh, a Caesar, or a Kaiser. And if you plot out these kingdoms, they go from small to bigger. And so like a nautilus shell that does the little circle, a little bigger circle, a little bigger circle, right? It's called the golden ratio or the Fibonacci sequence. But it's this idea that Nimrod Tower of Babel, where to concentrate power, God confuses the language, they scatter. Every generation since, there's been a new Nimrod trying to rebuild the tower, but on a grander scale.
Well, what about like Alexander the Great, for example, right? He was a world conqueror.
Correct.
Did it at a young age. I think he died around 33, didn't he?
Correct.
And then you had Xerxes, or was it the Medo-Persian? I mean, well, Daniel talks about that, the different kingdoms, right. World empires, yeah.
So if you plot it out, you start off with Gilgamesh, king of Uruk. So the first book ever written in any language was the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Okay.
He went on this long journey to meet the guy who survived a global flood named Upshanapsharin, right? Anyway, but then you have Sargon of Akkadian, 2250 BC, conquers from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean. And then you have the Assyrian king, and he conquers with his kingdom. And then you have 2,000 years of Egyptian pharaohs, and 5,000 years of Chinese emperors and Indian Maharajas. Raja means king, Maha means great. And then you have King Aga, Bashan, and so forth, and then Cyrus of Persia and Darius, and then Alexander the Great.
Okay.
And then finally after him is the Roman emperor.
And all the emperors.
And Attila the Hun.
Yes.
And then the Byzantine emperors, and then the Muslim sultans conquer from the Persian Gulf to the Atlantic Ocean. And then you have Genghis Khan in the 1200s, conquers from Korea to Hungary, kills 30 million people. He had the largest contiguous land empire in world history. And then you have the maritime empires of Portugal and Spain and France, but ultimately England. So the King of England had the largest empire that planet Earth had ever seen. And when America's founders wanted to break away from him, they were wanting to get away from a globalist, right? And they flipped it and made the people the king. So it's a polarity change. Instead of a top-down form of government, it is a bottom-up form of government. And I go through in the book where the founders got these ideas, a little ancient Rome, ancient Greece, but believe it or not, originally ancient Israel. So around 1400 BC is when Israel comes out of Egypt. They come into the Promised Land.
Yes.
This is the first instance in recorded history of a nation without a king. And for 400 years, they don't have a king.
Because God was their king, right?
God was their king, and they were ruled by the law.
Yes.
And the law says there's no respect of persons in judgment. So, where there's a king, if you're friends with the king, you're more equal. If you're not friends with the king, you're less equal. And if you're an enemy of the king, you're dead. It's called treason.
Yeah.
And so that's a pyramid hierarchical structure to society. In Israel, there not only was no king, the law specifically said there's no respect of persons in judgment. That's the beginning of the concept of equality on planet Earth, right? That everyone you see is equal to you. There's no royal family to butter up next to. Israel's the first nation with private land ownership. Because wherever there's a king, you never really own the land. It's always conditional of you staying on the nice side of the king.
That's right. Most people today don't have a loyal title because they pay property taxes, right?
Yes.
So they're kind of renting it from the government. And if you don't pay your property taxes after 5 years, you lose your property. It goes out on a book sale. So there's a gentleman today that never heard of a loyal title. I said, write it down and look it up. You need to have the status of your property changed. If you can, you might be able, if you don't have a mortgage, you can possibly get a loyal title. I have a friend of mine that talks about that, the late John Quaid. He was an actor that was in Every Which Way But Loose. Maybe you know him, the big ugly guy, but he was a Christian. Yes. And he was in a lot of Clint Eastwood movies, or several of them. But anyway, go ahead, William, keep going.
So in Israel, the land was permanently titled to the families. If they got in a pinch and sold it every 50 years, it reverted back to that family.
Because of the Jubilee year based upon biblical law, right?
Jubilee year. And so this prevented a dictator from gathering up all the land and putting the people back into slavery.
Wow.
If you own land, you can accumulate stuff. The Bible called that being blessed.
Yeah.
Karl Marx called it being a capitalist. You got capital, you got stuff, you worked hard, saved it, right? So they call it the promised land because the people got title to the land. Israel was the first nation with no police. Everyone was taught the law. Everyone participated in enforcing the law. Israel had no standing army. You have a king, he has an army to enforce his will. In Israel, every man was in the militia and armed and ready at a moment's notice to defend his family and his community. Israel had no prisons. And so it wasn't like Egypt where Joseph was wasting away in prison for a couple of years. In Israel, the law says swift justice at the gates of a city. Crimes committed, you get him, and get the elders together, you have the trial right then.
If it was a capital offense, you met with death. If it was less than that, you had to make restitution, depending on the crime, right? So crime didn't pay under the system that God instituted under Old Testament Israel.
Right.
Now, I talk about that, William, today, and people will say, yeah, but who's going to be so just and worthy to institute God's laws from the Old Testament? And does God really want us to go back to a theocracy? I mean, is that what Jesus came to do? I don't know if you want to touch upon that or not, because
so that brings up the next point.
Yeah.
So Israel is the first nation where the people got to choose their own rulers.
Okay.
So what do you mean? So where there's a king, he appoints people. They're subjects. The opposite of a subject is a citizen. A citizen implies a co-ruler, that you're bearing some of the responsibility of ruling. And so in Israel, Moses spake unto the children of Israel, saying, how can I alone bear your burden? Take you, wise men, and understanding, and known among your tribes. Bring them to me, and I'll make them your rulers. In other words, this was an election process within the tribe. And so it maintained the patriarchal family, the dad's in charge, and the granddad's in charge of the little clan. And then the elders of the city would be these granddads that would sit at the gates, and they would decide. And then the city would send somebody to the tribe, and then the tribe would send some representatives to the Jewish Senate, the Hebrew Senate called the Sanhedrin. It was a bottom-up form of government. And you read these stories in the Bible, they would say, oh, this and that. Well, get the elders of the city together, right? So it wasn't a king-appointed person. It was the people having their own leaders. And so this was unique in Israel. Also, Israel was the first nation that could read. Really? Yeah, in Mesopotamia they had 1,500 cuneiform characters. It was only for kings and scribes to keep record of everything the king owned. In Egypt they had 3,000 hieroglyphic characters. Just for court records, the scribes kept the hieroglyphs complicated on purpose as job security. It was their secret knowledge. Only 1% of Egypt could read, and they had these 3,000 hieroglyphs. When Moses comes down the mountain, he has the law in a 22-character alphabet. So easy to learn, kids could learn it. No longer is reading and writing the secret knowledge of this elite class. The whole nation could read. So Israel was an entire nation that was citizen dependent. And so it's a spectrum of power. One side is total government. The other side is no government. Total government, you get a king. No government is anarchy.
Every man did that which was right in his own eyes.
Well,
that was under the judges, wasn't it?
That's the next phase. You're connecting the dots and jumping ahead. And so in Israel, they had no government except the law was written for each person. But then the big question is, why would you follow an internal law? What would cause you to deny yielding to a selfish temptation? Ancient Israel.
Love for God, wouldn't it? Jesus says, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. That was in the New Testament.
Yes, you're connecting the dots very well. So in Israel, they introduced the key ingredient, a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he's going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, you know you can get away with it, and then you think, God is watching me. He wants me to be fair, he's going to hold me accountable. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And it creates something in your head called a conscience.
Conscience, yes.
If everybody in the country believes this, you can maintain complete order with no policemen.
It's called self-government, isn't it, William?
Yes.
You see, we don't need somebody controlling us and ruling over us. We control ourselves, we rule our own selves under God's law, and that's what I tell people. That's what we need today, but people can't do that, and so you got more bureaucracy. You got a totalitarian government today taking control over every area, education, banking, finance, you name it, law, the court system, everything.
Yeah, so the less internal restraints that people have,
the more external
restraints
Absolutely.
they need.
Yes, well put.
I tell the teenager, Parent tells the teenager, here are the car keys, you can drive around, come home whenever because I know you're going to do what's right, you have internal morals. But if you don't do what's right, drink and drive and party and speed, you're going to be pulled over by the police, thrown in jail, and controlled behind bars. So, teenager, you are going to be controlled, either voluntarily from the inside or forcibly from the outside. Same way with a nation. So in Israel's case, as long as they all believe that there was this God watching, who wanted them to be fair, and he's going to hold accountable, they maintained this maximum order in society with no policemen. Now it only works with the God of the Bible. An Islamic Allah God says there's an infidel woman there, nobody's around, you can rape her, it's okay.
Yes.
The God of the Bible says do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
The Muslim religion is all external, according to the late R.J. Rushdie.
Yes.
You make a trip to Mecca, and that's not even necessary, but if you can make it, great. You say prayers so many times a day, I don't know, 3 or 5 times, and you acknowledge Allah as the one God, right, and Muhammad as prophet. But Jesus says if you lust after a woman in your heart, you're guilty of adultery. And so a Mohammedan might think, well, no, that's not adultery. Well, that's what Jesus defined it as. And so they're all guilty of adultery, as we all are. And so, yeah, keep going, that's good.
Yeah, so in a sense, Islam is the religion of Cain.
A religion of what?
Adam, Cain and Abel.
Oh,
So
yeah.
Cain wanted to worship God,
Yes.
but he did it through his works.
Yes.
There's no lamb in Cain's theology. It's
Exactly.
just works. We know it's works because God told Adam, the ground is cursed for your sake and you'll bring forth fruit by the sweat of your brow.
Right.
So here's Cain sweating, working, getting his wheat, his barley, his oats, and piling it on the altar. Did Cain's works make him acceptable to God?
No.
No.
His offering was
Abel-
not accepted.
His offering was not accepted. And so Abel had faith in the lamb, sacrificed the lamb, and his offering was accepted. And so I tell people, are you approaching God as Cain or as Abel?
That's good.
If you're still hoping you're good enough to go to heaven, you are approaching God as Cain. I hope I piled enough stuff on the altar. Or are you approaching God as Abel? It's not me, it's this lamb that gave its life to die in my place. Anyway, that's a whole nother talk.
Salvation is by grace through faith, it says in Ephesians 2:8-9, right?
Yes.
Not of works, lest any man should boast. But see, the whole thing today between the Roman Catholics and the Protestants, they say, well, you have to have works. Protestants are emphasizing grace only, but we are his workmanship created in Christ Jesus unto good works, not because of our good works. And Jesus says, let your light shine before men that they may see your good works. So I think works are presupposed. I mean, they go hand in hand with the faith. You see, they result from a saving faith. Does that make sense? In other words, you cannot be saved and not have works.
Right, so good works do not precede salvation.
Exactly.
But they should follow
Absolutely,
salvation.
and that's what Revelation says, actually. The book of Revelation, I can't remember where, it says their works do follow them into heaven.
Right.
Follow, not precede. Good point.
So Israel is the first nation in recorded history that had no king. This became a model for America. You think, really? Do you have any proof? Well, the U.S. Constitution was written, and it needed to be ratified by 9 states. They had 8. New Hampshire was in line to be the 9th, but it was having a deadlock at its state ratifying convention in 1788. And so Harvard President Samuel Langdon goes and he gives an address titled, "The Republic of the Israelites, an Example to the American States." Instead of the 12 tribes of Israel, we may substitute the 13 colonies of the American Union and see this application plainly. And he goes on to explain this comparison. And so here, after his sermon, New Hampshire votes to ratify it. They are the 9th state. The U.S. Constitution goes into effect. After the sermon, the Republic of the Israelites, an example to the American states. Anyway, it's a fascinating book.
Great.
Who is the king in America? The people are the king. And it's not only a privilege, it's a responsibility, which means if things mess up, God will hold you accountable.
That's excellent.
So you don't just have the privilege of voting, you're going to be held accountable to God if things get messed up. But anyway, my website is AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com, and I send out a free daily email that you can sign up for. And you can also get my books there or on Amazon.
Well, thank you, William, for sharing your information with us. You're a wealth of information. I mean, like I said, history, I got B's in high school and college, but all those dates and ideas, it's a lot. It takes a lot you got to do a lot of reading, obviously. You have.
Well, Carlton, you're brilliant. I'm very impressed at how you can connect the dots so quickly. And you jump ahead of where I'm going with my thoughts, and that shows you got a very high intellect. And so